I remember when I first stumbled across PragerU and thought, wow, what a goldmine of stupid.
We still don't have a way to account for the great diversity of life forms.
Wrong.
Well, today I've got something even better. It's called exploregod.com, and not gonna lie, I kind of feel like a kid in a candy store. Now, some of the videos on this website do deserve their own response, but for this video, I'm gonna go for a hat trick on some of the most unconvincing videos I've ever seen in support of Christianity. First, we have this guy attempting to explain how science points to God.
Well, when I think of it scientifically, you think of the principle of the first cause, and you start to explore the history of the universe. And even at the Big Bang Theory, you have to ask yourself the question, what caused it? And if you can come up with an answer for that, what caused that? And if you can come up with an answer for that, what caused that? What was the preceding cause? What was the uncausable cause?
Holy shit! It feels like... Alexa, what year is it?
It's 2012.
That's exactly what it feels like. So let's just get this straight, because apparently this guy has not looked into the prime mover argument at all, the very least of which would have been to search for it on YouTube around this time. The short answer is, we simply don't know anything about the universe beyond a certain point backward in time, beyond which our laws of physics cease to apply. To claim that we can apply the idea of causation to the universe itself is, at best, an unjustifiable premise, and it also risks being a composition fallacy, arguing that because things within the universe are contingent, therefore the universe itself must be contingent. In fact, here's physicist Sean Carroll's response to William Lane Craig's argument that the universe had a beginning, and that beginning must be God.
Now you might think that, there's a theorem by Alan Guth and Arvin Bourdet and Alex Vlenkin that says the universe had a beginning. I've explained to you why that's not true, but in case you don't trust me, I happen to have Alan Guth right here, one of the authors of the Bourdet-Guth-Vlenkin theorem. Alan, what do you say? He says, I don't know whether the universe had a beginning. I suspect the universe didn't have a beginning. It's very likely eternal, but nobody knows. Now, how in the world can the author of the Bourdet-Guth-Vlenkin theorem say the universe is probably eternal for the reasons I've already told you? The theorem is only about classical descriptions of the universe, not about the universe itself. Dr. Craig gets a lot of mileage out of the presumed nuttiness of things just popping into existence. Why don't bicycles just pop into existence? Again, I tried to explain what makes the universe different, but more importantly, the phrase popping into existence is not the right one to use when you're talking about the universe. It sounds as if it's something that happens in time, but that's not the right way to do it because there is no before the beginning, if there is a beginning. The correct thing to say is there was a first moment of time. When you say it that way, it doesn't sound so implausible. The question is there a model in which that's true? Do the equations of the model hang together? Does the model fit the data? And we have plausibly positive answers to all of those.
So as you can see, asking questions like,
what was the uncausable cause?
Is not an accurate way to think about the universe and how it came to be. Let's move on.
In addition to that, our world functions in order. It's not random and chaotic as it may seem. A sunrise and a sunset has a certain time period in which it happens. The rain is connected to the evaporation of the ocean waters, and the whole ecosystem functions in unison.
Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never miscommunication.
And you begin to see the evidence of beauty even in the midst of this brokenness, and realize that as much as I want it to be random, that there's connectivity all around us.
As much as you want it to be random? You know what? Never mind. I'm just going to leave that. Thing is, Leonce, why does consistency require a god? I could easily imagine you making the same argument if we lived in a world that was chaotic and random. You'd say something like, well, what's causing everything to be chaotic and random? Surely things would be just a little more consistent unless a god was standing there pulling the strings, right?
And so, even when you look at all of the other scientific systems, Darwinism, and every other postulation for how human beings function and how the universe works, there's always a gap, there's always a question, there's always a why.
And that's okay. It's okay to not know everything. It's okay to not have an explanation for everything.
There's always a gap, there's always a question, there's always a why. And I just came to realize not only with proof, but in reason, but with faith.
Oh, we're allowed to use faith. Well, guess what? These people have faith that your beliefs are wrong. So, later.
Not only with proof, but in reason, but with faith. That standing in those questions, standing in those gaps, was the God of the Scriptures. That he was not only the answer, but he was the author. That he was not only the narrator, but he was the reason for the story. And that he had graciously written me into it.
This has got to be the highest production value, lowest quality God of the Gaps argument I've ever seen. So, like I said, goldmine. Alright, moving on, we have another classic argument, the one that says atheists have faith just like Christians.
They say there were centuries of human history where maybe God and religion was necessary to help explain the inexplicable things that we all face in human life. But now that we have science, now that science has basically proven the way that things exist, we don't need an idea of God anymore.
That's one hypothesis, although another is that religion is simply an incidental activity created from other faculties that do serve practical purposes, like pattern recognition, inferring agency, and the ability to conduct hypothetical conversations. I've included a link to a lecture on this idea in the description below.
I always feel like it's a little funny. It reminds me of what happened in 1961 when the Russians sent the first cosmonaut into space. And it was a very exciting moment for the whole world. First person, first human into space. And when he went into space, the message that he sent back to Earth was, God is not here.
Alright, that's pretty funny. I'd give it a solid B.
He was essentially saying, I have gone into space, I have gone to look for God, and because I do not see him, therefore God does not exist. And of course, there's something really silly about that. I mean, the idea that we could observe God with human instrumentation and with the human eye is absurd. And
well, of course it's absurd. Otherwise, your God would be absurd. And we can't have that, can we?
And if there is a God, if God is real, then I guess what I think is that God would be so big and so beyond us that you couldn't just observe him with like a telescope or in a lab.
You know, it really is a funny thing. God is mysterious and so beyond our understanding until it's convenient. Then he's totally relatable. For example, in the argument about free will, the argument would generally go, well, why didn't God create humans already loving him so that no one would go to hell? And the response I've heard on multiple occasions is, well, think about it. Would you be happy with pre-programmed love, or would you want it to be freely chosen? It's funny how God can be so petty and relatable in one context, but then so big and mysterious in another one.
When I was going through my own period of really severe doubt when I was studying philosophy in college.
All right. I'm sorry to interrupt again so soon, but can I just say, isn't it interesting how learning about logic and proper argument structure can cause religious people to doubt so much? I couldn't help but notice this in my own college philosophy courses. A few people in the room were clearly struggling to hold the religious baggage they came in with. Just an interesting observation.
I read a book. It was called A Severe Mercy by a man named Sheldon Vonnegut, and it was a story about how he came to faith in Jesus. And he was an atheist. He was a very committed atheist. And he began to learn about Jesus, and he began to struggle with this idea that Jesus could be God in the flesh. And he told this parable. He calls it the parable of the cliff. And he said, I imagined myself standing at this cliff, and there was this huge gap in front of me, and it was a gap between me and God, and it was a gap that required me to have faith to believe that Jesus was God in the flesh.
All right, that's a pretty clear way to concede that there's no actual proof of God, nor any rational reason to believe in him. What else you got?
And he said, I just did not feel that I had the faith to overcome that gap and get to the other side. But this is what he said. He said, then I realized I turned around and there was a gap behind me as well. There was a gap before me, but by God, there was a gap behind me. And I realized at that moment that it took just as much faith to believe that Jesus was God as it took to believe that he was not.
All right, 2 points to make here. First, just because there are 2 possibilities, that doesn't mean there's a 50% chance of each one being true. And second, what about simply not being convinced that Jesus was God, rather than believing that Jesus was not God? This is the difference between a verdict of innocent versus not guilty. There simply isn't enough evidence to discard the null hypothesis. There isn't enough evidence that Jesus was God.
And that it's not as if it takes faith that, I'm a man of science, you're a man of faith. No, we're all people of faith. We all are basing our lives on basic presuppositions that cannot be proved. Yes, God cannot be proved, but he cannot be disproved either.
Oh my God, it is 2012! Gather round, children. It's time for some good old-fashioned presuppositional apologetics.
And so I think when it comes to Jesus Christ, I think what ultimately kind of sent me over the gap was realizing, I needed to believe that this person, this man, was God in the flesh, revealing the unobservable God to me. But I think what made me feel better about it, at least, was knowing that, yes, it took faith to believe that, but it took just as much faith to believe that he wasn't.
Wait, that's different. That just goes back to the fact that having 2 possibilities doesn't mean they're 50% likely, and also that agnosticism is a perfectly reasonable epistemological position. Sorry, children. False alarm, he's not doing presup.
And so when I got to the point of realizing that either way I was going to be living by faith, that made it a little bit easier for me to step over the gap in front of me.
Right, which is when you converted to every religion all at once because they all require this kind of leap. Yeah, I know. Who am I kidding? We all know that the religion you were born into always just so happens to be the right one. So yeah, that was insightful. And finally, we have this video, Are We Created?
There's an amazing thing about music, which is that it's actually based on physics.
All right, I'm going to need everyone to lower their expectations just a little bit.
Which is to say, you take a string and you pluck it or strike it, and it starts resonating. And it resonates with the overtone sequence. It actually doesn't resonate with just one note. It resonates with a fundamental frequency, then an overtone, and another overtone. And those overtones, when they add up, create what we think of when we think of you pluck a guitar string or play a note on the piano. And our minds are tuned to find that overtone sequence beautiful, which is kind of an incredible thing. We are predisposed, when we hear chords or music that fits in that overtone sequence, it sounds harmonious, like we kind of feel at home there. And I think this is quite amazing that we are tuned to hear music in the world, because you never hear that unless you stretch a string.
You never hear musical notes unless you stretch a string. Right, so singing never existed. This 40,000-year-old bone flute also never existed. That's basically what I'm getting out of this. Now, I think I understand what he's trying to say, but it doesn't really redeem it at all. I think his argument is something like, hey, if we really evolved, then why do we naturally like music, which we can only have after we've evolved and can pluck strings? That's what I think he's saying. That's the only thing I can imagine he's trying to argue, but that's just dumb.
I think this is quite amazing that we are tuned to hear music in the world, because you never hear that unless you stretch a string. And you don't stretch a string unless you're a person. There are no other creatures that stretch things out and then pluck them, right? There's sound in the world, but only when human beings come into the world do you have music.
Well, yeah, also airplanes, fried chicken, and nukes. So what? But whatever, let's hear about this guy's son who plays the viola. Don't worry, it'll all make sense. Well, sort of.
But now that he's taken it seriously and practiced and worked at it, he's achieved this kind of excellence. Even the simplest things are just beautiful. And you want that in your house. And I think, I can't believe the awkward 8-year-old is now this accomplished 16-year-old. And to me, it's a picture of what every human being in one way or another is meant to do, which is to take some part of the world and work at it so carefully, so patiently, and diligently that we're able to create something truly beautiful out of just the simplest materials in the world. The beauty of the world doesn't happen until human beings come and start making things, making music.
Oh, I completely agree. This landscape, not beautiful. This waterfall, not beautiful. This birdsong, oh, you better believe that's not beautiful.
And the fact that the world was built to have music, it has these harmonious frequencies just waiting to be played by human beings, to me says we're created for beauty.
If the laws of physics worked a different way, we would probably find other things beautiful. If we evolved in a world made of sludge, we would probably find specific types of sludge beautiful. I know it's hard to imagine that, but that's kind of how evolution works. Animals adapt to the world around them, and it really does help if intelligent animals can derive pleasure from the world around them by finding things beautiful.
And then the way we respond to it, like how deeply we respond, and the way that it activates both our heart and our mind, the way that it's this kind of mind-body experience, music, more than any other experience, I think. It combines the heart and the soul and the body and the mind. To me, says we're made, it's a picture of what we're made for. We're made to make beauty, we're made to appreciate beauty, to notice beauty, to be drawn to beauty, because the God who made the world loves beauty and wanted the world's beauty to be elicited by us. I believe more and more that God is not absent, God is present.
I'm just gonna have to say it again. This is the highest production value I've ever seen on such a silly argument. Goldmine.